People's Climate March in New York City, and there are many other marches around our globe in solidarity. We are hoping that the largest number of people ever will gather to march and protest and sing and make their stand on the issue of climate change. The goal is to make an impact on the UN Climate Summit 2014, which begins this week in New York. This is the work of our lifetime, because if we fail to make the changes needed, all the other issues that we hold dear to our hearts, homelessness, hunger, war, labor, racial justice, income inequality, all these will be magnified. And this is hard work. It's soul work. So we begin this morning with a prayer. And this prayer was written by Clyde Grubbs and Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley, two Unitarian Universalist ministers. And it comes from a book called Voices from the Margins. Source of life. The road of history is long, full of both hope and disappointment. In times past, there have been wars and rumors of wars, violence and exploitation, hunger and homelessness, and destruction of this earth. We have become a global village with a growing realization of how fragile this earth is and how interconnected we are, each to each other and to all creation. We cannot continue to live in the old way. We must make a change, seek a new way, a way toward peace with justice and a healthy planet. O great creative Spirit, you have given a vision of the good, and we yearn for this new way. But where are we to find the courage to begin this work? We know that a different tomorrow is possible, but how can we build it? We think of the prophets, women, and men who voiced unpopular opinions, who made personal sacrifices, and sometimes lost their lives for justice. We think of Isaiah, who called out to let those who are held in captivity go free, to give solace to the poor and homeless. Let us be inspired by all who work to overcome misery, poverty, and exploitation. We think of Harriet Tubman, who called out to people of goodwill to join her on the Underground Railroad to lift a dehumanized people from the bondage of slavery to the promise of freedom, even when it meant challenging unjust laws. Let us be inspired by those who were outlaws for freedom. We think of Gandhi, whose belief in the soul force, the witness to love's truth, helped to overthrow the oppression of an empire and gave witness to the way of nonviolent action. Let us be inspired to become witnesses for peace. We think of Chief Seattle, who reminded us that we belong to the earth, not the earth to us. Let us be inspired by all who work for the healing of creation, of Mother Earth and her creatures. Who are the prophets who inspire you? They may be well known or known only to you, offering personal inspiration, courage, and hope. May they join a great cloud of witnesses to a new way of life, the way of peace and justice, the way of justice lived according to the way of peace, the beloved community, a healed planet. Amen.
Good morning. So today is a very special day for our religious exploration classes because it's the official day of beginning of class for our new church year. So we are excited to be doing that. And today the adults are going to be talking about the environment and climate change and how one thing is related to another. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that too. And I'm going to read you a story today, and it's actually a true story of something that a group of women did in the 1970s in India, and it's called Ani and the Tree Huggers. Ani set down her basket of brown nuts she'd been gathering and sat beneath her favorite tree. Every day, at least once, she leaned gratefully against its thick, rough trunk. Here, she had daydreams too large to fit in her family's crowded hut, where crying babies, her grandfather's complaints, and her sister's gossip drowned out the sounds of Ani's own thinking. She crushed a red berry to make a red spot on her forehead like her mother's, and she wove grass around her ankle. Then all of a sudden she heard a rumbling and a roaring. The sound was angry as a tiger's growl, and it was louder than thunder, seemed like the stormy voice of the snow-capped mountains. She glanced to the Himalayas, but the voice was not coming from that snowy home. As the grinding and gnashing grew louder, Ani sprung up. She knocked over the basket of nuts and ran towards home. Her mother was not in their hut in their yard, and her father and the other men were in a distant field, cutting the rice. Ani ran to the river and found her mother, filling a jug of water. "Mother, can you hear that noise?" And her mother put down the jug and listened. They looked past the smoke that curled between the tree trunks. "It's a truck, a gigantic and swift cart." And the other women who were there reached them as well. "We heard from the forest runners. The men from the city have come to take the woods." "But the forest has always been there," said Ani. "Our people have always been here." "The men for the city will say we don't own it, and they will cut it down." The rumbling had stopped, and Ani lifted her hem of her sari and ran towards the place where they heard the noise. They stopped when they saw the truck. Several men were swinging axes, and one held a tool with jagged and sharp steel teeth. "Namaste," Ani said, and the women put their hands together prayer-like and bowed their heads. The men continued to swing their silver axes at the bottoms of the tree trunks. The metal first broke the bark. The gnashes grew wider. One man pushed a broken tree, and it thudded to the ground. Ani's mother covered her mouth. "Stop!" Kalawati cried. The man pulled the chain of a saw, and the grinding noise was shrill, but Kalawati spoke loudly. "The trees give us their fruit and berries. The wood provides our houses and our plows and hoes. The roots keep the land from sliding when heavy winds and rains come off the mountains." But the men continued to swing the axes. The swaying and buckling branches let Ani see the wind, and the wind let her see her spirits. A man with an axe seemed only to touch a tree, and it crashed down. Kalawati ran towards him. "Stop!" the women cried. And she grabbed for the man's axe, and the man pushed her down. "Get out of the way. We use these branches for our fires. We need them to cook our food and warm our homes." And the man just said, "We've got our orders." "Already you've cut more than we cut in an entire year," Kalawati said. "Animals live among these trees. Where can they go?" And he just brushed past her and went about his business. All of a sudden, Ani started to run towards the tree. "Ani, come back," her mother called. Ani threw her arms around the tree. She pressed herself against it. The man and his axe were at her back. How easily the axe could have pierced her back. "Ani," her mother screamed. Ani heard her fear, but she still pressed herself closer to the tree, so close so nothing came between him. The bark scraped her cheek, and she didn't look around until the sounds of the saws and the swinging axes stopped. The wind wound around the trees, and the leaves softly woo-hooed and hummed. And then she saw all around her, women and children were hugging the trees. The red tikas on the women's foreheads made bright spots in the forest, and the men had put down their axes and they were whispering, "Please go home. This is our home," they said. "We'll give you 1,000 rupees just to leave." And Ani thought about all of the things 1,000 rupees could buy for her family. It could buy a goat, or that could carry kindling. It could buy them food. It could buy them maybe even a new home. No, we don't need 1,000 rupees. We need the trees. And once again, Annie and the women clasped their arms around the trees, and they didn't move until they heard the rumble of trucks, first loud and then fainter. Where do you think the trucks went? They went away. That's right. Annie dropped her arms around from the tree. Namaste. Peace was what they wished for everyone who came and left. Ani's mom said, "What did you think you were doing? I was so afraid." And Ani said, "I was afraid too." And then Ani and her mom and all of the women started to dance. Overhead, the birds flew from tree to tree, and someone began to chant, and they looked at the great range of mountains and whispered a prayer to the goddess mother of the world. The trees were safe now. They were safe, all of them.
Our meditation this morning comes from the book Earthbound by Brian Nelson. Autumn is the time of maturity. Our culture, obsessed with celebrating youth, may not have a full appreciation for what autumn teaches us. But today, look at the sun that finds a deeper place in the sky, at the leaves as they take on more distinctive personalities. Quietly take it all in and be thankful for the lessons that time has brought into your own life. As you grow more mature, taste both the bitter and the sweet. You have been, you are becoming more seasoned, and your life is richer for it. So at this time, let us take a few moments in stillness to listen, to pause, and to get in touch with the inherent richness in our lives as we approach the autumnal equinox this Tuesday.
I'm not accustomed to speaking from the pulpit, despite the fact my initials are JC. I want to thank you, by the way, very much for allowing me to come here this morning. An insistent but otherwise wonderful daughter has asked me to come here today and spend a few minutes describing my considered views on global warming and the role that humans have played in increasing its rate. I am no specialist in the field of global warming, but as a scientist of many years practiced, I feel competent to look at the same data that each of you has a chance to view and reach reasonable conclusions about its veracity. Have you heard someone say, "I don't believe humans are responsible for global warming"? I'm sure you have. The operative word here is believe. In any discussion of cause and effect, it is important to distinguish between knowledge and belief. Astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson said it well. He said, "Once a scientific truth emerges from a consensus of experiments and observations, it is the way of the world." What I'm saying is, When many different experiments give you the same results, it is no longer subject to your opinion. That's what a good thing is about science. It's true whether you believe it or not. That's why it works. There are two issues here. The other is that Earth temperature rise and its cause, the two separate things that we can talk about. Yet about 1/3 of Americans appear to doubt that the Earth's temperature is rising, mostly because of man-made heat-trapping greenhouse gases. And it's important to note the difference between weather and climate. Weather is a day-to-day observation, not usually in a straight line, not ever in a straight line around here. Climate is an overall long-term picture of all weather. Weather may be unusually cold in one place at one time, so someone might erroneously question global warming. What are the main facts regarding greenhouse gases? Well, the Scripps Institution for Oceanography in the University of California in San Diego reported in April 2014, the atmospheric CO2 concentrations reached its record high of 401.33 parts per million, the highest level in the last 800,000 years. Over the past 7,000 years, the concentration of CO2 has gone from a nearly flat 70 parts per million at the beginning of the 20th century, after which it shot up suddenly to its present 400 parts per million. That's an enormous rise, an enormous change in the rate of rise. We can read the archaic records of the amount of carbon dioxide from ancient ice cores that go back hundreds of thousands of years, back 800,000 years. We can even tell the source, that is it natural or man-made industrial CO2? Of the CO2, we can tell this from the isotopic composition, the type of carbon in there. Recent CO2 corresponds to the CO2 emitted by industries using coal, gas, and oil. There can be no question about that. Some of the effects are already apparent. Global sea level rose about 17 centimeters, that's about a little less than 7 inches, in the last century. The rate in the last decade, however, is nearly double that of the last century. This is already producing a devastating effect on low-lying nations. The evidence is overwhelming. Temperatures going up, springs are arriving early, ice sheets are melting, sea level is rising. The island nation of Kiribati averages about 7 feet above sea level, is already seeking a new national home somewhere else in the Pacific. Patterns of rainfall and drought are changing, if it's not easy to observe that here in our last months. This comes largely from the large amount of extra energy that we're putting in the ocean through sea warming, which is directly perhaps related to carbon dioxide levels and air warming. In September 2013, the UN report raised the probability that human action led by the use of fossil fuels are the main cause of climate change to at least 95% confidence level. That's an international report. Presently, by burning coal, oil, and gas, our civilization is producing CO2 faster than the Earth can accommodate it. Temperatures have already risen by 0.8 degrees since 1900 and are set to breach the 2 degrees Celsius in coming decades. And there's an accelerating effect. Melting of glaciers increasing the amount of sunlight that's captured by the Earth rather than reflecting it, so much more heat is absorbed by the Earth as glaciers melt. Permafrost thawing will accelerate global warming as well. Permafrost is perennially frozen ground, occupies about a quarter of the exposed land in the northern hemisphere. So that's a lot. Melting permafrost puts a large amount of carbon dioxide and also methane, which is even worse greenhouse gas, into the atmosphere, accelerating the greenhouse problem. Northern Siberia is already experiencing huge sinkholes. I'm sure you've seen this on the news. Result of permafrost melting. Can we possibly muster the determination to slow temperature rise on Earth? The UN Climate Panel warns speedier action is necessary to avert disaster. Countries of the world have dragged their feet so long on global warming that the situation is now critical. They say that only an intensive worldwide push over the next 15 years can stave off potentially disastrous climate change later this century. Dire UN climate reports raise questions about global willpower. The big questions remain about whether the world's nations will take action and ultimately about whether these recent reports that I mentioned will matter at all. Unfortunately, the action required is economically extremely costly and disruptive to societies politically. It's death knell for anybody who gets on the wrong side of it. So, very pessimistic point of view, and I'm not sanguine about the possibility of achieving the level of cooperation among people and nations that would be necessary to reverse or even stabilize the process of global warming. We have shown so far almost no propensity to relinquish or modify our behavior in ways required to stop this out-of-control process. I am, regrettably, convinced that we're destined to die in our own soup. Hot soup. Thank you. On that optimistic note, I appreciate your attention.
Carl Sagan, of course. Our pale blue dot, our brave new planet. It is so easy to become overwhelmed and fall into despair at the seeming enormity of the task that lies ahead of us. And the very real danger is that our despair might keep us from seeing the urgency of responding to climate change. But perhaps even more difficult is if our despair keeps us from seeing what each of us is called to do to be part of the solution in saving our world. I agree with my father in his assessment of our chances at avoiding the consequences of our present action, unless we move quickly and boldly to make the needed change. We're nearing several tipping points with not linear but exponential reactions expected. And once crossed, we cannot go backwards from these tipping points. This is scary, scary stuff because we don't have much time left. But I stand here today with hope in my heart and determination in raising my voice along with many, many other voices. Today, hundreds of our brothers and sisters marching in New York and around the world, making their views heard ahead of the UN Climate Summit, which begins on Tuesday. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has invited world leaders from government, finance, business, and civil society to this Climate Summit 2014 to try to galvanize and catalyze climate action. And he's asked these leaders to bring with them this week bold announcements and actions to the summit that will reduce emissions, strengthen climate resilience, and help to mobilize political will for a meaningful global summit agreement in Paris in 2015. And this march to demand action today is not just a gathering of the traditional tree-hugging, green environmental folks. They're included in it, of course, but it's also a gathering of various movements. People like us who are fighting fracking and big oil overreach in their own backyard, labor unions, people whose children suffer from asthma and cancers, students demanding divestment from fossil fuels at their universities, indigenous groups and coalitions of working class people and people of color who bear a disproportionate impact of the ravages of climate change, and faith groups, including our own, who are compelled to act and to lift up this issue, this struggle, as the moral issue of our time. This is a broad grassroots movement with many people directly involved in their own communities who are fighting back as the fossil fuel industry has become more aggressive about laying claim to more land and water resources with blatant disregard to people's health, utilization of precious resources such as water, and effects on the land through leaching of toxic chemicals, and the tragedy of the highly stratified distribution of wealth and power gained in our fossil fuel economy. The motivation of those who stand to gain with the continuation of business as usual is simple. You can figure it out. It's money and power. And that's why the climate movement has to come from the grassroots as we work toward this vision of hope for the future. A green economy, a renewable economy would have a different focus than our current economy focused on fossil fuel. Fossil fuels have created this stratified economy in multiple ways because to extract and transport fossil fuels takes a huge amount of infrastructure, and profits, not surprisingly, are concentrated at the top. But many of the costs of dependence on fossil fuels are hidden costs. We pay a certain price for our fossil fuels, but we're also subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. The hidden costs are destruction of our environment, increased health costs in cancers and asthma, wear and tear on our nation's infrastructure, and the list goes on. A green economy, on the other hand, is more decentralized, less stratified, healthier for people and animals and our planet. Unfortunately, the obscene profits of big oil are used many times to buy off politicians and political races, and are poured into fighting against attempts of people to organize and protect their communities as they try to take a stand against oil and coal and other fossil fuels. Witness what we see going on here in Santa Barbara County with the reaction of big oil to Measure P. Measure P on the ballot this November would ban high-intensity petroleum operations defined as fracking, acid well stimulation treatments, and cyclic steam injection. The oil companies are pouring thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars into misleading television ads. Anybody seen those? And hiring young people, and I've met some of these young people who have been hired to canvass neighborhoods to buy votes. The oil company has hired them to get people to vote no. By the way, I would highly recommend checking out the site Ballotpedia to get a good summary of Measure P, and it has arguments pro and con, Ballotpedia. And also we have an informational evening here at Live Oak on October 6th on this ballot measure. So the question becomes, how are we, as people of faith, called to respond both to the challenge of passing Measure P and this broader issue of climate change? Are we to simply throw up our hands and say, well, I hope I live in a place of enough privilege that we might be spared the starvation and displacement, war and disease that are the lot of other parts of our world? Or shall we answer the call with an active hope? My Unitarian Universalist faith calls me loud and clear to stand on the side of love, time and time again, issue after issue. And in terms of the issue of our day, climate change, here is where it leads me. Our Unitarian Universalist faith affirms the worth and dignity of every person. Moving away from fossil fuel dependency means that the health of every person is valued and not sacrificed to the degradation of our air, our land, and our water. Each person is valued economically as new jobs in green industries are created. Each person is valued as those now living at the margins of our petroleum-dependent economy, those suffering greatly due to environmental racism, stand up to demand that they too should be able to drink clean water, breathe clean air, and not suffer disproportionately the effects of climate change. Our Unitarian Universalist faith promotes justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Where is the justice inherent in big oil trying to buy the election using misinformation, double talk, and scare tactics to defeat Measure P for its own advantage? Where is the equity in this David versus Goliath scenario of the people versus the status quo contributing to global warming? It seems obvious that it is ultimately to the advantage of all people to move toward a low-carbon economy that could offer faster economic growth, better lives, a greener environment, and would help stop the climate change that has us currently teetering on the edge of disaster. Our Unitarian Universalist faith promotes the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in society at large. Here it is, folks. We will experience firsthand whether we, the people, still have a say in the democratic process, both here in Santa Barbara County and across the globe. Will the power of the people to put pressure on politicians to respond constructively be enough? Will we be able to muster the votes necessary to vote yes on Measure P and pass that measure and help move our little part of our country a bit closer to the possibility of loosening the grip of the fossil fuel industry? If you are so inclined, after service today at 12 o'clock, there is a rally in support of people standing for climate change. It's at Plaza de Veracruz Park on Haley, and I will be there, and I hope to see some of you there raising our voices on this issue. Our Unitarian Universalist faith promotes the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and affirms our acknowledgement of the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are but a part. Climate change is a worldwide issue, and we are inextricably bound together in this web of existence. What affects one part of the web affects us all. Our Earth, our beloved pale blue dot, is not a commodity to be bought and sold. We're part of the Earth, and it's a part of us. The earth and the air and the water must be held in a sacred trust, and we human beings who have brought such destruction to our planet must find a way home to deep understanding of the interconnection of all. Chief Seattle spoke of this understanding in the mid-1850s when he said, "The earth is our mother. What befalls the earth befalls the sons and daughters of the earth. When all our natural resources are gone, it will be the end of living and the beginning of survival." Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. Our Unitarian Universalist faith is a rock that we stand on in this struggle for our very survival. I am convinced that we are called by our faith to lift up our vision and put our energy and resources toward the transition from this current industrial society reliant on fossil fuels toward a sustainable society committed to the very principles and values that we hold dear as we move toward healing and recovery of our earth and justice for all her people. At the end of the People's Climate March today, there stands an art installation, and it is a tree of life. This is ritual space to grieve what each of us stands to lose from the climate chaos. And it's a place where they will be able to affirm their solidarity as we unite to fight against it. People from around the world have written on ribbons and sent them into New York. People today are writing on these ribbons what they most love in their life. My children, next year's crops, our very survival, what they don't want to lose in climate chaos. And then the ribbons flowing in the wind form the roots and leaves of this massive tree. And participants are invited to come forward and take a ribbon from someone else and read it aloud. And the crowd responds, "We are with you." And then the people tie these ribbons on their wrists to take home with them, committing themselves to work to beat back climate chaos so that our worst fears never come true. Choose life. Let this image of the tree of life with the ribbons flowing with all that we love, with what we stand to lose, and all that we stand to gain, carry us forward in the days ahead as we engage with this most vital issue of our time. May our commitments and our passions join together as a giant thread connecting all of us as we stand yet again on the side of love and work toward a healthy, sustainable, and survivable planet for us all. Amen, and blessed be. Would you please join hands for our benediction, and note that there will be a congregational response to the final line of the benediction. Everyone connected? Our faith, this congregation, is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences, beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We pause in silent witness to that unity. And may the blessings of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. And may love's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore. So be it. Amen. Blessed be. And now, as we extinguish the light of our communal chalice, our service truly begins.